I wasn't hiking when this happened, but I think it's worth telling anyway because the memory of it has never left me. It was one of those nights where the world feels quieter than usual, and every detail sticks in your mind. It was around 3 in the morning, and I was driving home from a friend's house just outside the city. Normally, the road I took was packed during the day. 4 lanes of cars moving constantly, horns blaring, lights flashing. But at that hour, it was empty. Not just quiet, but completely still in a way that makes you notice how alone you really are. The air was warm but heavy, and my windows were cracked just a little to let in the smell of damp earth and asphalt that had cooled from the day's heat. The road stretched ahead under the glow of tall streetlights, but the further I went, the fewer lights there were. By the time I reached the wooded stretch, the lamps were spaced so far apart that they only cast pools of dim yellow light, leaving long gaps of shadow between them. That part of the road always felt a little different, even in the daytime, because it dipped slightly downhill and passed under a bridge. On both sides, thick trees pressed up close, their branches leaning over the guardrails like they were reaching into the road. It was as I came over a rise that I first saw something. At first, it was just a shape small against the black ribbon of road. I thought maybe it was an animal, like a stray dog or a deer, since I'd seen those before at night. I slowed down, letting my headlights stretch farther ahead, until the shape became clear. It wasn't an animal at all. It was a person. A woman stood directly in the middle of my lane, perfectly still. Her body faced me head-on, like she had been waiting. As I got closer, I could make out her hair, matted and tangled, hanging in uneven strands around her face. Her clothes looked torn and dirty, hanging loosely off her frame like they hadn't been washed in weeks. She didn't wave for help or try to move aside. She just stood there, facing my car as I crept closer. That was already unsettling enough, but then I noticed her mouth. At first it looked like she was holding something, but as my headlights hit her more directly, I realized she had a cluster of sticks in her teeth. Not 1 or 2, but a whole bundle of twigs and small branches, clutched between her jaws so tightly that they stuck out on both sides of her face. Her lips were pulled back, her teeth locked on the wood, and her jaw muscles looked strained from holding them. Her eyes were wide open, bulging almost unnaturally, fixed right on my car as if she'd been waiting for it to appear. The sight of her hit me harder than I expected. Even though I was inside a moving car, I felt a jolt of fear that made me let out a quick noise, half gasp, half scream. The image was so strange, so out of place, that it didn't even register properly in my head at first. It wasn't like she was injured or asking for help. It was like she had chosen to stand there, in that position, with that disturbing expression, in the middle of an empty road at 3 in the morning. I slowed almost to a stop, not sure what to do, and then instinct took over. I eased into the next lane, planning to just pass her safely and keep going. But the second I moved, she moved too. Not just a shuffle or a stagger, but a sudden, purposeful lunge toward the direction of my car. Her legs jerked forward fast, as if she was trying to put herself in front of me, like she wanted me to hit her. I swerved quickly, cutting across another lane to give her a wide berth. My tires hummed against the lines of the road, my heart racing, and I sped past her as fast as I could. In my side vision, I saw her head whip toward me, those wide eyes following my car. For a split second, I thought she was about to dive at the vehicle, but then she stayed behind, standing under the glow of the nearest streetlight, her figure shrinking in my rearview mirror. The twigs still stuck grotesquely out of her mouth as she stared after me. I gripped the wheel tighter than I ever had, forcing myself to keep going straight. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to drive faster, to put as much distance as possible between myself and whatever I had just seen. But the fear didn't vanish when she was out of sight. It lingered, crawling under my skin, leaving me shaken in a way that wild animals on the road never had. This was different. This was a person, and her behavior hadn't made any sense. The road stretched on in silence, no other headlights approaching, no sign of life anywhere. I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see that black silhouette sprinting after me, but the asphalt behind me stayed empty. The rest of the drive felt like it took an eternity. I kept the speedometer just a little higher than usual, eyes fixed on the dark road, my stomach in knots. When I finally pulled into the lot of my apartment building, I parked faster than normal, cutting the engine and sitting in silence for a moment. The world outside the car seemed darker than usual. I had to cross from my parking spot to my building, just a short walk, but it felt like a mile. Every shadow along the path looked like it could hold a figure. My heart pounded in my ears as I locked the car and forced myself to walk briskly, my keys clutched tight in my fist. The hallway light inside my building felt blinding compared to the darkness outside. Once I shut the door to my apartment behind me, I leaned against it, breathing hard. The image of her face wouldn't leave my head. Those twigs jutting out, her jaw clamped down, her eyes stretched wide as she watched me. It wasn't like anything I'd ever seen before, not in real life. I never reported it, though sometimes I wonder if I should have. Maybe she needed help. Maybe something was seriously wrong. But the way she moved toward my car, quick and deliberate, told me that if I had stopped or gotten out, things could have gone a lot worse. That night changed the way I think about being out late. The road I took was one I'd driven hundreds of times without a second thought. But now, every time I pass that wooded stretch under the bridge, I feel myself tensing up, eyes scanning the lanes like I expect to see her there again. She never showed up after that night, but the memory still lingers, and I doubt it will ever go away. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't some trick of the dark. It was a person standing out there in the middle of the road at 3 a.m, doing something that made no sense at all. And somehow, that makes it the most disturbing encounter I've ever had. It started as a typical summer night with some friends. We had planned to meet at a lake not too far from town for a campfire. Of course, copious amounts of alcohol were involved. It was supposed to be a fun, relaxed evening. Music, laughter, beers, the whole deal. I got to the spot a little later than some of the others, but the others were already struggling a bit. The road in was barely a road, more of a dirt track, and when we got there, we found a barricade. Someone had clearly tried to keep people out. We drove around it carefully, but as soon as we hit a particularly soft patch, one of the cars got stuck in the mud. While everyone was pushing and trying to get the tires spinning without digging ourselves in deeper, I glanced around at the dark trees, the shadowed lake just visible through breaks in the foliage, the thick brush pressing against the narrow dirt path. I made a joke, loud enough to cut through the grunts and shouts. Something about how this was exactly how a horror movie would start. Everyone laughed, and for a moment it was funny. Cars stuck, mud everywhere. The smell of wet earth and gas and alcohol mixing in the warm night air. We finally managed to get the car free, tires slipping but eventually gaining traction, and continued on to the lake. The scene was perfect in that way that only late-night drinking trips in the woods can be. The fire was built, logs stacked, flames licking the air. Music from a small portable speaker filled the clearing with a low, steady thrum. Drinks were flowing, people were laughing and joking, passing bottles back and forth, telling stories that got louder and more ridiculous as the night went on. Then, out of nowhere, this guy just walked out of the woods. He wasn't running or shouting, just casually walking, a beer in his hand like he was invited. At first, I froze, instinctively scanning for any kind of threat. My gut hit the alarm button immediately. I don't know why exactly. There was nothing about his clothes or his appearance that screamed danger at first glance. But everything about the situation screamed danger to me. My friends waved him over, laughing at my sudden tension. Of course, I'm the one who watches too many scary movies, they said. Relax, they said. The guy ended up sitting down a few feet away from me. I didn't move closer, didn't try to chat, just kept my eyes casually on him while keeping one hand near the cooler for the beers. And then I saw it, the hatchet someone had brought for firewood sitting beside the cooler. A little rational part of me knew it was just a tool, but the rest of me decided I wasn't going to be caught off guard. I grabbed it, resting the handle across my lap, edged down, feeling its weight and comfort in my hands. That's when he made his first comment. I remember the words exactly because they cut right through the haze of alcohol and laughter. "I can see your jugular. I want to bite it." My stomach dropped. Laughter from my friends was still floating around the fire, but it didn't touch me. That sentence didn't feel like a joke. I was ready to leave. I was mentally planning my escape, trying to figure out how to get out of the woods safely without having driven there myself. The guy didn't stop there. At some point, he mentioned he should have brought his chainsaw. My chest tightened. Everyone else shrugged it off, maybe thinking it was humor, but my mind started running scenarios. Terrible ones. I shifted closer to the cooler and one of my friends, putting as much distance as I could between him and myself without making it obvious. The hatchet stayed in my hands, half as reassurance, half as a warning to him if things went wrong. Time passed slowly, each comment from the guy making me more uncomfortable. Every laugh from my friends felt distant, like it was happening in a separate, safer world that I wasn't part of. Then I noticed it. When I reached for a beer, the hatchet was gone. My stomach lurched. I froze, glancing around subtly at first, trying to see where it had gone without drawing attention to my sudden panic. And then I saw him, across the fire, holding the hatchet up like a trophy, smiling at me. "Looking for this?" he said casually, as if it was the funniest thing in the world. That was the moment I decided enough was enough. I whispered to one of my friends that I was leaving and got them to come with me. We packed up quickly, gathering drinks, extinguishing the fire, and moving as silently as possible back to the cars. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the underbrush made me jump, my pulse racing. The guy didn't follow, at least not visibly, but the threat hung in the air like thick smoke. The drive back was silent except for the low hum of the tires over the gravel. I kept my eyes on the road, checking the mirrors constantly, my grip tight on the wheel. I kept replaying the night in my head, each detail sharper than before. The hatchet, the comments, the casual way he had walked out of the woods. By the time I got home, my hands were shaking, and it took hours before I could even think about sleeping. The next day, everyone else shrugged it off. "Nothing happened," they said. "He was probably just some weird guy. Didn't mean anything." But I couldn't see it that way. I didn't care about his motives. I didn't care about what my friends thought. I had seen too many horror movies, read too many true stories of bad nights in the woods. A random man, alone, showing up uninvited with alcohol in hand, making those comments, holding a hatchet. There was no ignoring it. I wasn't laughing it off. Not then, not ever. Since that night, I don't go anywhere in the woods late at night unprepared. I carry a knife, a flashlight, a whistle, and I always make sure I have a way out. That experience taught me something important. The woods are unpredictable and people are unpredictable. You can't assume everyone out there is harmless, even if they're smiling and holding a beer. And I've never forgotten that night. The way the firelight flickered across his face, the casual way he held that hatchet, the words that should have been jokes but weren't. I might be white, might be from a safe area, might look like I could shrug it off, but I don't. I never have. I don't hike, I don't camp, I don't sit around fires at night without being completely aware. That night, I learned that horror doesn't come from the movies. It comes from real people, real choices, and the perfect combination of darkness, isolation, and luck. I've spent enough time hiking to know that the outdoors has a way of keeping you humble. You can prepare, plan, and pack all you want, but the moment you step off into the woods, you give up a certain amount of control. Things don't always go the way you expect. Most of the time, those little mishaps end up being funny later, even if they aren't at the time. That's how this particular hike turned out for me. It started as just another solo trip, but by the end of it, I walked away both rattled and weirdly relieved that it hadn't gone worse. It was early summer, a few years back, and I had driven out to a trailhead tucked away in the mountains. The weather was decent, warm but not hot, the kind of day that makes you want to stay outside as long as possible. I had packed light, just enough for one overnight. A small tent, sleeping bag, food, and the basics. My plan was to hike in about 6 or 7 miles, find a good place to camp, and then hike back the next day. Nothing complicated. The first stretch of trail wound through thick forest. The ground was soft from a storm that had passed through earlier in the week, and every step gave off that damp, earthy smell you only get in deep woods. Birds moved between the trees, and every so often a squirrel would dart across the path. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful, the kind of quiet that lets your thoughts wander without much interruption. By midday, I had covered good ground. I stopped by a stream to refill my water bottle, sat on a rock, and ate a quick snack. The forest felt empty, but not in a bad way, more like it was holding its breath. I hadn't seen another hiker all day, which was exactly what I wanted. I thought about how nice it would be to wake up to that silence. The sun coming through the trees, the sound of water in the distance. The trouble started later in the afternoon, when I decided to cut off the main trail and follow a narrower one that looked less traveled. My map showed it bending back toward the stream, eventually reconnecting with the main path, so I figured it was a good loop. The trees grew denser along that stretch, the canopy closing in overhead until the light dimmed. The ground was uneven, with roots twisting up like traps and ferns brushing against my legs. After maybe a mile on that side trail, I started to get a strange feeling. At first it was just awareness, how the air seemed stiller, how the sounds of birds and insects had gone quiet. Then it shifted into something sharper, that prickling sensation on the back of your neck when you know you're not alone. I stopped a couple of times and listened, but the only thing I heard was my own breathing. Still, the feeling didn't go away. I kept walking, trying not to overthink it. The trail curved through a patch of thicker brush, and when I stepped out on the other side, I noticed something odd. In the mud at the edge of the trail was a footprint. Not mine. It was fresh enough that the edges were sharp, the heel and tread pattern clear. I crouched down and studied it. The size wasn't unusual, just an ordinary boot print, but it unsettled me. I hadn't seen anyone ahead of me, and the trail was too narrow to miss someone unless they had stepped off deliberately. From then on, I couldn't shake the tension. I kept glancing into the trees, watching the shadows shift, waiting for some sign of who else might be out there. The light began to fade, turning the forest darker and colder. My plan had been to set up camp near the stream, but I found myself second-guessing it. The idea of stopping, of being stationary while someone else might be moving nearby, didn't sit right with me. I finally came to a small clearing and decided I couldn't push much farther without risking losing daylight altogether. I set up my tent quickly, hands a little clumsy from nerves. I boiled some water, ate a simple meal, and tried to settle in. But the feeling lingered. I kept listening, ears straining for any sound beyond the normal creaks of the forest. It was around midnight when I woke up. At first, I wasn't sure what had pulled me out of sleep. I lay still, heart thudding, and then I heard it. A soft snap, like a branch breaking under weight. It wasn't close, but it wasn't far either. The kind of sound that makes you freeze and strain to hear more. A few seconds later, another noise, a slow, deliberate crunch of leaves. I reached for my flashlight but didn't turn it on. Instead, I sat in silence, my breath shallow. My mind raced through every possibility. An animal, maybe, but the steps sounded measured, not like the shuffle of a deer or the clumsy crashing of a bear. More like a person trying to move quietly and not quite pulling it off. The noises came and went for what felt like an hour. Sometimes they were closer, sometimes farther, but never gone completely. I lay back in my bag, staring at the ceiling of the tent, every muscle tense. My imagination ran wild, painting pictures of someone lurking just beyond the thin nylon wall, waiting for the right moment. At some point, the sounds faded. Exhaustion took over, and I must have dozed off again. When I woke in the gray light of dawn, everything was still. The forest looked ordinary again. The same trees, the same ground, but my nerves were raw. I unzipped the tent and stepped out, scanning the clearing. Nothing looked disturbed. No footprints, no signs of anything unusual. For a second, I wondered if I had dreamt the whole thing. I packed up fast and hit the trail. The morning air was cool. My pack felt heavier than usual, and all I wanted was to get back to the trailhead. Every step away from that clearing felt like relief. The forest was waking up again. Birds calling, branches swaying, and it helped ease some of the tension. Still, I kept glancing back over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone following. When I finally broke out of the trees and saw my car waiting in the lot, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I threw my pack in the back, climbed inside, and just sat there for a while, watching the trailhead as if something might emerge at any moment. But nothing did. The woods stood silent, and I was alone again. Looking back, I can admit nothing actually happened. No confrontation, no proof of anyone else out there. Just noises in the night, a footprint in the mud, and a gut feeling that I wasn't as alone as I wanted to be. It doesn't sound like much, not compared to the real dangers people talk about, but at the time it was enough to keep me wired for hours. Funny how something so simple can stick with you. I needed that reminder, though. Out there, isolation cuts both ways. It gives you peace, but it also makes you vulnerable. You don't always get to choose which side of it you'll feel. That trip left me shaken. Sure, but it also left me laughing later, because in the end, all that fear boiled down to nothing more than a bad night and an overworked imagination. Scary in the moment, hilarious in hindsight, and something I'll never quite forget. I was hiking alone when this happened, and it's one of those memories that still creeps back into my head sometimes when I least expect it. Started out as a normal day. I had been looking for a quiet stretch of trail outside town, someplace where I could clear my head without running into too many people. The weather was cool, the light was soft, and the forest seemed alive in that way it sometimes does when you're far enough away from the noise of everything else. My plan was simple. A few miles out, find a good place to rest, then turn back before it got too late. The first couple of hours were uneventful. The trail wound through tall trees, the ground soft with pine needles and damp earth. I fell into a rhythm with my breathing, that steady cycle of inhale and exhale that always calms me down. For a while, I forgot about everything else. Birds darted between branches above me, the air smelled clean, and the only sound was the crunch of my boots and the occasional stir of wind through the canopy. It wasn't until I stopped for water that I realized I wasn't as alone as I thought. I had been standing on a stretch of trail where the trees opened up just enough to let some light in. I dropped my pack, took a long pull from my bottle, and when I looked up I caught movement on the side of the trail behind me. A man was crouched low, half hidden near the edge where the brush began. At first I thought maybe he was tying his shoe or rummaging for something he dropped. But the way he froze when I spotted him, the way he held himself rigid, silent, it sent a shiver down my back. For a moment, we just looked at each other. I couldn't read his expression. He didn't move. He didn't wave or nod or do anything you'd expect from someone casually sharing the same trail. He just stayed low, staring. My chest tightened as I realized how far out I was, how long it had been since I'd seen another hiker. There was no sound of voices, no nearby road, nothing but the trees closing in. I forced myself to pick up my pack and sling it over my shoulders. My instinct was to move, to get distance between us. The problem was that I didn't know if he was going the same way, or if he had been following me already. I started walking at a steady pace, not running, not looking back too much, but every hair on my body was on edge. The trail curved and dipped through pockets of shadow, and I kept listening for footsteps behind me. Sometimes I swore I heard them, soft and irregular, as if someone was keeping just enough distance to avoid being obvious. After a while, the trail narrowed along a slope where one side dropped into thick brush and the other rose into a wall of rock. It was the kind of place where you couldn't easily step off the path. My breathing got tighter. I felt trapped, hemmed in. I kept moving, faster now, my eyes darting from the shadows ahead to the ones behind. At one point, I stopped and held my breath, and that's when I heard it clearly. The shuffle of a boot against gravel, too close to be anything else. I didn't look back. Instead, I pressed forward until the trail finally widened again into a flat stretch. My mind was racing. I thought about how far I was from my car, how easy it would be for someone to corner me out here. There was no cell service, no one to call for help. The forest, which had felt peaceful just hours before, now felt like it was closing in. Every tree a barrier, every bend in the trail another blind spot. By the time I reached a small clearing, the sun was already sinking lower, and the light filtering through the trees had turned gold and weak. I was sweating hard even though the air was cool. I spotted a fallen log and sat for a moment, trying to steady myself, but the feeling of being watched wouldn't leave. The silence pressed against my ears until even the smallest noise, the snap of a twig, the flap of a bird's wings, made me jump. I knew I couldn't stay out there much longer. Darkness in the forest isn't forgiving, and the thought of being followed after the sun went down made my stomach twist. I forced myself back onto the trail and pushed harder, half hiking, half jogging, ignoring the ache in my legs. Every so often I glanced over my shoulder. Sometimes I caught nothing but shifting shadows. Other times I thought I saw the shape of someone moving just beyond sight, slipping behind trees whenever I turned too quickly. The last mile back to the trailhead was a blur. My lungs burned, and the straps of my pack dug into my shoulders, but fear kept me moving. I remember the moment I finally broke out of the tree line and saw the gravel lot where my car was parked. Relief washed over me, but it wasn't clean relief. I still felt the presence of someone behind me, even as I fumbled for my keys and yanked the door open. I sat inside with the locks clicked down, gripping the steering wheel with sweaty hands, my eyes darting over the lot and the edge of the trail. No one came out. No one followed me into the open. The forest stood quiet, the trail empty, as if I had imagined the whole thing. But I knew I hadn't. That man crouching by the trail, the sound of footsteps behind me, the way the air seemed to thicken with every step. It was real. I sat there until the sun dipped behind the trees, watching the shadows grow long across the gravel. My heart finally slowed, but the unease didn't leave. Even now, years later, I think about that hike. I think about how easily it could have gone differently if I had lingered too long in the wrong spot or let my guard down. People always joke about the woods being creepy, about the things that might be lurking in the dark. The truth is, the scariest thing out there isn't an animal or some story. It's another person, unpredictable and hidden by the same cover you thought would protect you. That day taught me something I've never forgotten. In the wilderness, you're never completely alone. And sometimes the most unnerving thing you can stumble across isn't a bear or a cougar. It's another human being, crouched low, watching, waiting, with intentions you'll never really know. It wasn't exactly a hiking story, but it's one of those things that happened to me that stuck so hard in my memory, it might as well have been a scene out of a nightmare in the woods. I had been at a friend's place just outside the city, and by the time I left, it was pushing 3 a.m. The drive home wasn't long, maybe 20 minutes, but that stretch of road I had to take was strange at night. During the day, it was one of the busiest 4-lane roads in the area. Cars, trucks, buses, constant noise and movement. At night, though, it turned into something different. It felt abandoned, with traffic lights blinking on empty intersections, the hum of my tires echoing off the road and the trees lining it on both sides. That night, it was especially quiet. I rolled the windows down at first, trying to get some fresh air to keep myself awake, but the silence outside made me uneasy, so I rolled them back up. I had the radio on low, just background static and music, and I kept the speed steady. The road cut through patches of woods, with thick trees crowding close to the edges, broken only by the occasional service road or bridge. The streetlights were sparse, too, leaving wide sections of shadow where it felt like anything could be hiding. I was tired, zoning out in that way you sometimes do late at night, when headlights cut through the same stretch of road you've seen 100 times. That's when I saw it, the shape. At first, it was just a dark figure ahead, dead center in my lane. My brain struggled to process it because who would be standing there at this hour, in the middle of an empty road? I eased my foot onto the brake, slowing down as I tried to make sense of it. The closer I got, the clearer it became. It was a woman. Her hair was tangled and matted, hanging wild around her face, and her clothes looked torn, ragged, hanging off her like they'd been worn for days without care. She was standing stiff, her body squarely facing me, right in the middle of the lane. My headlights washed over her, and that's when I noticed her mouth. It wasn't just open. She had something clamped between her teeth. At first, I thought it was trash, maybe fabric, but then the details sharpened as I drew closer. It was sticks, twigs, small branches, maybe 5 or 6 of them, jutting out both sides of her mouth like some crude, jagged gag. She was biting down hard, her jaw locked around them, and her lips were stretched wide. Her eyes looked enormous in the light, bulging, fixed on me like she was waiting for me to come closer. The sight hit me with such force that I made a sound I don't even remember choosing. It wasn't a full scream, but it was sharp, a noise that broke out of me before I could stop it. I was in my car, safe behind glass and metal, but the raw, unnatural look of her standing there at 3 in the morning with sticks jutting from her mouth made my stomach lurch. My hands tightened on the wheel as I slowed, debating whether to stop, turn, or just keep going. I tried to think logically. Maybe she needed help, maybe she was mentally ill, maybe she was high or in trouble. But logic didn't matter in that moment. My instincts screamed at me to avoid her. I flicked on my signal and eased into the next lane over, planning to pass wide. As soon as I did, she moved. It wasn't slow or hesitant. The second my car angled away, she lunged in that direction, a quick, deliberate step like she was trying to throw herself in front of me. My heart jumped into my throat. I swerved harder, cutting across to another lane. Again, she shifted toward me, eyes locked on my headlights, mouth still clamped down on those sticks. It was so fast, so decisive, that I was sure if I didn't keep swerving, she would have slammed into the front of my car. The tires hummed and gripped as I jerked the wheel, giving her as much space as possible. I pressed the gas and accelerated past, my eyes flicking to the side mirror for a glimpse of her as she slipped out of the beam of my headlights. For a split second, I saw her still standing there in the road, twisted back toward me, her outline shrinking as I sped away. My chest was heaving, hands clenched so tight on the wheel that my knuckles ached. I had passed her, but the panic didn't drop off. My skin was buzzing, hair standing on end, as if she had somehow managed to cling to me even though I had left her behind. Every shadow on the side of the road felt sharper. Every cluster of trees seemed to hold another figure just waiting to step out. The drive that normally felt short stretched endlessly. I kept glancing in the mirrors, half expecting to see her running down the center of the road after me. That same wide-eyed stare and those sticks jutting from her mouth catching the shine of my taillights. Of course, there was nothing but empty asphalt stretching behind me. But the thought wouldn't leave. When I finally reached my neighborhood, the streets were as deserted as the main road had been. I pulled into my usual parking spot, but I didn't move right away. I sat in the car, engine idling, my hands still gripping the wheel. The silence outside pressed in on me. The walk from my car to my apartment door was short, maybe 30 yards, but that night it felt like crossing open ground under a spotlight. I turned off the car, grabbed my bag, and forced myself out into the night air. Every step I felt exposed. My eyes scanned the shadows between parked cars, the corners where the light didn't reach, the trees lining the edges of the lot. My keys were clenched in my hand, sharp edges pressed between my fingers like makeshift weapons. I kept waiting to hear footsteps behind me, or worse, that scraping sound of sticks grinding together. I reached the door, shoved the key into the lock, and hurried inside, slamming it shut behind me. The relief of being in a lit, locked space hit me, but it didn't fully shake the unease. I paced around my apartment for a while, every window shade pulled tight, my ears tuned to the faintest noises outside. Sleep didn't come easy. In the days after, I tried to explain it away. Maybe she was under the influence, maybe she was homeless, maybe it was some kind of mental breakdown. I ran through all the rational explanations, but none of them dulled the image burned into my mind. The matted hair, the torn clothes, the deliberate way she stepped into my lane as if daring me to stop. And above all, that jaw clenched around a mouthful of sticks, eyes unblinking, fixed on me. It was years ago, but to this day I can still see her as clearly as if it happened last night. It's the eeriest thing I've ever witnessed, and the memory always comes rushing back if I'm driving late at night on an empty road. No matter how many excuses I give it, no matter how much time passes, I can't shake that feeling. It was wrong. It was human, but something about it was so deeply wrong. And that kind of fear doesn't leave you. I had been waiting all week for that hike. It was late summer, one of those weeks in Los Angeles where the heat sits on you like a weight all day long, then finally breaks just as the sun starts sinking. I decided to do a 5-mile loop in the Santa Monica Mountains, the kind of trail I'd been on plenty of times before, but this time I wanted the timing to line up with dusk. Something about hiking when the light changes always makes me feel alive. The way the sun dips low, turning the chaparral gold, the air finally cooling after a day of heat. It's one of those small rewards you get living in Southern California if you're willing to sweat for it. The loop wasn't too demanding. It started with a slow climb, weaving through dry scrub and sagebrush, the kind of terrain that rattles under your boots and leaves dust clinging to your socks. Every now and then the trail opened up into wide views of the city below, the grid of streets already starting to glow as lights flickered on. To the west, I could see the ocean stretched out in the fading light, a dark sheet against the horizon. I carried just a small day pack with water, a bar or two, and a headlamp for the walk out. The first few miles were everything I wanted them to be. Quiet, except for the sound of crickets starting to come alive in the brush, and the occasional thrum of wings when a bird darted past. The air had that dry, dusty smell mixed with the faint sweetness of wild sage. I moved at a steady pace, enjoying the solitude. There's a comfort in being out there alone, but it's also a thin kind of comfort, the kind that can flip on you if anything feels off. About halfway through, as the trail began to level out, I saw another figure in the distance. At first, it was just a shape moving toward me, backlit against the dying light. Nothing unusual. Hikers pass each other on those loops all the time. But as the gap closed, I started to focus on details. The stride, the way his arms swung, the way his shoulders sloped. Something about him tugged at the back of my mind. When we were maybe 20 feet apart, I finally got a good look at his face. My stomach tightened instantly. Recognition hit me like a punch. I knew that face. Not from real life, but from late nights watching movies. From one role so unforgettable it had burned into my brain years ago. It was Ted Levine, the actor who had played James Gum, better known as Buffalo Bill from Silence of the Lambs. For a split second, I couldn't move. My body kept walking because that's what you do when you cross paths with someone on a trail. But inside, I froze. My brain didn't see an actor anymore. It saw him, that character, all the unsettling images rushing back at once. The pit scene, the voice, the menace. I knew it was irrational. He was just an actor, just another person out for a hike. But in that dim light, in the solitude of the trail, the connection was too sharp, too immediate. We got within 3 feet of each other. I looked up and our eyes met. He saw it, the flash of recognition on my face, the exact moment when I realized who he was. His expression shifted in a way I'll never forget. There was no menace in it, no threat, just this sad, resigned acknowledgement. Like he had lived this moment 1,000 times before, strangers catching sight of him and instantly putting him back into a role he had played decades ago. His face seemed to say it all. Yes, I'm him. No, I'm not really a serial killer. I didn't slow down. I didn't smile or nod or say anything. I just walked briskly past, heart thumping in my chest, trying not to show the unease that suddenly filled me. I could feel his eyes on me as I passed, and every instinct told me not to look back too soon. The trail stretched ahead into dimming light, the dirt pale against the dark brush. I focused on it, each step quicker than the last. After about 100 yards, I finally gave in and glanced back over my shoulder. He was still there, standing on the trail, his figure framed against the dusk. He wasn't following, just continuing his own hike, probably shaking his head at the reaction he got yet again from some stranger who couldn't separate him from the most notorious role of his career. Still, seeing him back there sent another chill through me. The rest of the hike out was tense. Every sound in the brush made me jump. The crack of a twig, the rustle of dry grass, even the distant call of a coyote. Rationally, I knew I wasn't in danger. He was just another hiker, no different from me, probably enjoying the evening air, maybe even looking for the same kind of peace I had been. But once that fear gets its hooks in you, logic doesn't do much. I kept replaying that split second of recognition in my head, the way the character and the man blurred together in that moment. By the time I reached the trailhead, the sky had gone dark and the parking lot lights flickered on. I unlocked my car with shaky hands, threw my pack in the back seat, and sat there with the door locked, letting my pulse calm down. Slowly, the tension drained, replaced by a strange mix of relief and embarrassment. Relief that nothing had happened, that I was safe. Embarrassment that my brain had twisted something so ordinary into a brush with danger that had never really been there. Looking back now, I can laugh at it, but at the time it was one of the most unsettling moments I've ever had outdoors. Not because of anything he did. He hadn't said a word, hadn't made a move, but because of how powerful recognition can be when it hits you in the wrong place at the wrong time. Out there alone, in fading light, my mind filled in all the blanks with fear. That hike reminded me of something important. The woods, the mountains, the trails, they're already places where you're vulnerable, where your senses stay heightened because you know you're far from help. Add in an unexpected trigger, like crossing paths with a face tied forever to one of the most terrifying characters in film, and your imagination can turn ordinary reality into something far darker. In the end, nothing happened. Just two people passing on a trail at dusk. But the memory sticks with me. The lightning bolt of recognition, his weary expression, the silence as we passed. It all left a mark. I finished that loop faster than I ever had before, and when I think about it now, it still makes my chest tighten. The wilderness doesn't need ghosts or monsters to unsettle you. Sometimes all it takes is another human being and the baggage your own mind brings to the encounter. I was deep in the mountains when it happened. It was winter, the kind of winter that swallows everything whole. The snow had been falling for days, then eased off into a strange stillness. I had set out for a multi-day hike, aiming to cover ground that didn't see many boot prints. The type of hike where solitude presses down on you like a weight and the cold feels endless. There were no signs of life except the occasional animal track crossing my path, and even those were rare this time of year. The air was brittle, every breath burning my lungs. It was the third day when I stumbled on it. I had been trudging along a ridgeline, the snow waist deep in some places, the horizon blotted out by pale gray sky. My legs felt like lead, but the silence around me kept me going. When the wind stopped, the world seemed so quiet I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I crested a small rise and looked down into a clearing that seemed untouched. The snow was pristine, flat, a blank sheet of white, at least almost blank. Across the clearing, in letters maybe 3 feet tall, were words drawn in the snow. The letters were clean, deliberate, etched with some tool or maybe a boot, but they were sharp and straight, like they hadn't melted or shifted with wind. I blinked at them for a long time, confused, thinking at first it might be some weird trick of shadow. But no, the words were there, per audacia ad ignotum. I stared. Latin. The phrase made my stomach clench, though I couldn't place why. Later, I would look it up and find that the closest meaning was through audacity towards the unknown. At the time, I didn't know the exact translation, but even without understanding, the words unsettled me. The way they looked, so intentional, so out of place, felt wrong. I stood frozen, scanning the clearing. My first thought was obvious. Footprints. Someone had to have made those letters, and I expected to see tracks leading to or from them. But there weren't any. The snow around the words was smooth, untouched. It was impossible. No one had dragged anything, no one had stepped nearby, no trails in or out. Just those words sitting there like they'd appeared on their own. I felt my heart rate quicken, thudding in my chest. I crouched, squinting, but even up close the surface of the snow looked flawless except for the letters. No disturbance, no crushed surface around them. It was as if the words had been set down from above, pressed into the snow without anyone ever touching it. The strangest part was how fresh they looked. Snow changes quickly, edges soften, shapes blur. But the lines of these letters were crisp, as though they had been made just hours before. I looked around me, scanning the tree line and ridges for movement. Nothing. No sound, no tracks, no smell of campfire or hint of another person. Just me, the words, and the still air. I stood there for a long time, longer than I should have. I kept telling myself it was probably some hiker before me, maybe using poles or sticks to scrape the message into the snow, and maybe the wind had covered their trail. That had to be it. But the logic didn't settle in my mind. It didn't explain why the letters looked untouched by wind or why there was nothing else disturbed around them. My nerves started to buzz. My skin prickled under my layers, and every instinct I had told me to leave that clearing behind. The longer I looked, the more exposed I felt, as if I were standing in an open field with someone's eyes boring into me. I adjusted my pack and turned away, forcing myself not to keep staring back. My boots crunched in the snow, each step loud in the silence. The rest of that day dragged on. The fog rolled in again, and my pace slowed to a crawl as visibility dropped. The words kept replaying in my head, their sharp edges burned into my memory. It didn't matter that I didn't know their exact meaning. The phrase itself carried weight. Something about it felt like a warning, or a dare. That night, I camped in a small stand of trees. I dug a shallow pit in the snow to set my tent, the fabric shaking in the wind as I worked. When I finally crawled inside, I couldn't shake the unease. Every gust against the tent made me jolt. I found myself listening for footsteps, for breathing, for anything out of place. The forest was empty, but my nerves kept saying otherwise. I barely slept. Every time I drifted off, I would snap awake with a start, heart racing, convinced that someone was outside the tent watching. At one point, I sat up and checked the zipper to make sure it was fully closed. My flashlight beam caught nothing but swirling snowflakes, but that didn't calm me. The next morning, I packed quickly and got moving. The fog hadn't lifted, but I felt safer when I was moving, like I was leaving whatever strangeness I had stumbled on behind me. My boots carried me down into valleys and up ridges, the trail sometimes disappearing under fresh powder. My legs burned, but I didn't slow. The phrase gnawed at me, per audacia ad ignotum. I didn't need to know Latin to understand the implication. Someone had written that with purpose, maybe as a message for whoever happened to come across it. Maybe for themselves, maybe for me. I never saw another person on that hike. Not that day, not the next. No other signs of life, no evidence that anyone else had been in that part of the mountains recently. By the time I finally descended out of the higher elevations and back toward the trailhead, my body was exhausted, but my mind was sharper than it had been in days. I couldn't stop thinking about that clearing. When I got home, I looked up the phrase. The translation hit me harder than I expected. Through audacity towards the unknown. It made sense. Someone had stood in the middle of nowhere and carved those words into the snow, far from anyone, and left them like a marker. Could have been meant as inspiration or as a test or as something else entirely. But the lack of footprints, the impossible neatness, the isolation, it gave it a weight that didn't feel human. Even now, years later, I can picture it perfectly. White snow, unbroken, words cut into it as if they had always been there. No origin, no explanation, just a message left in silence, in a place where no one should have been. I never went back to that trail in winter, and every time snow starts to fall heavy around me, I think of that phrase and how small and exposed it made me feel standing out there, completely alone. The hike ended without further incident, but the memory didn't fade. It sits in the back of my mind like a splinter, sharp and impossible to forget. Out of everything I've seen in the backcountry, the storms, the wildlife, the isolation, Nothing has unsettled me like those words in the snow. They didn't need an explanation. They didn't need footsteps. They were enough on their own to remind me that sometimes the unknown isn't far away at all. Sometimes you step right into it without warning. And once you do, it stays with you forever.